Planning for your honeymoon or next special occasion trip and looking for a destination that just hits different? You know, a honeymoon that's more than just fancy cocktails by a beautiful pool. A honeymoon that balances romance, thrill seeking, ancient culture, and natural landscapes so beautiful it'll make you cry. Then today's episode is for you. We are diving into how Australia and New Zealand are the perfect destinations for a unique, immersive honeymoon that will lay the foundation for a lifetime of love and adventure. G'day, mate. I'm beyond excited to get into today's episode because we're talking about two of my favorite countries in the world. You guessed it, Australia and New Zealand. And I may be a bit biased because my husband is from Australia and I lived in Sydney for 5 years. But truly, I don't think I could ever get bored of Australia and New Zealand as destinations. They've got amazing beaches, incredible surf, world-class hiking, the oldest rainforest in the world, the Daintree, the Great Barrier Reef. You've got Maori culture and volcanoes and what else? Glaciers. Like, it is unreal the amount of experiences that you can have in these countries that range from the top of the top luxury romantic experiences to the nitty-gritty hiking and camper vanning to wellness experiences to cultural experiences. Like, these destinations are truly top notch. And today we have the honor of learning from Amy Mace. Amy is the head of marketing at ANZCRO, which is a DMC specialist for Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. ANZCRO is one of the leading companies in the world when it comes to travel across these destinations. So you are going to learn a lot in this episode. We're diving into some of the most unique nature-based experiences, cultural immersions, and romantic stays that you can have during your travels there. And we talk about why the raw beauty of the natural landscape of Australia and New Zealand really lay a foundation of romance, of connection. It's truly why Australia and New Zealand are the premier honeymoon and special occasion destination in the world. So get your notepads out because you will be taking notes during this episode. All right, let's go. Welcome back to another episode of the Transform with Travel podcast. This month, we're highlighting incredible destinations around the world that really allow you to foster a deeper connection with nature and the land. And today's destinations are two destinations that really hold the top spots in my heart. Truly, truly, truly. Today, we're welcoming Amy Mace to the podcast, who's here to share how Australia and New Zealand are not only premier destinations to visit in general, I can personally vouch for this, but also why they should be at the top of your list when deciding destinations for your honeymoon or a romantic trip away or just a special occasion trip. Australia and New Zealand are some of the premier destinations for that. And today we're going to uncover that. And Amy has the unique perspective of not only living in Australia herself, having traveled all over Australia and New Zealand, but also she's the head of marketing at ANZCRO, which is one of the leading companies in the world specializing in all things travel to Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Amy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. Great to be with you.
Awesome. And I met Kieran, who was on your team back in October at a conference for travel advisors, and we got matched up because of my specialty in planning trips to Australia and New Zealand. And it was hands down one of the best industry dinners I've ever been to. So you can relay that message back to him. It was awesome. We had so much fun. And it really inspired me to start thinking again about heading back to New Zealand for personal travel. And it brought up a lot of really, really incredible and also emotional memories for me, like positively emotional memories. And I knew when I started thinking about this series of destinations I wanted to highlight this month that Australia and New Zealand had to be a part of this conversation. So I'm really appreciative that you're here and sharing your time. And I'm really excited to learn more from you. So Amy, you've had the privilege of traveling extensively across Australia and New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey into the travel industry and your current role as head of marketing at ANZCRO?
Absolutely. So I started at ANZCRO in February 2020. So for those outside of the travel industry, that was about a month before Australia shut its borders. So a month before the world shut down for our business in terms of being able to sell holidays. And interestingly, that was my first career in travel. My background is in advertising, media, marketing. I've been in those fields for collectively 2 decades now, 20 years, but this was my first job in travel and it happened right before COVID. So definitely an interesting way to start my foray into the wonderful world of travel marketing. It did allow us to reset and reevaluate how we communicated with our travel agents. We are a B2B business, so we sell to travel advisors. How we communicate, how we market our destinations to them. And, we had a couple of years where we could strip everything back and completely re-engineer all of that process. And I think now we've emerged brighter, stronger, and more lean than we were pre-COVID. Our assets reach more travel agents than ever. We produce more assets than ever, more regions within our destination than ever. So yeah, it was an interesting start, but it's been a fantastic journey to date. And I couldn't imagine working in another industry now.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that, how, I mean, challenging, but also special to come into your role in the marketing department to be able to almost like you said, reset and kind of reevaluate how you do things. Oftentimes, I worked in marketing for 10 years before I fully, committed into the travel industry, but you're oftentimes chasing your tail, like just on campaigns and the next thing, and we're marketing the next. It's just you don't have a lot of time to be able to readjust and pivot in a very strategic and mindful way. Oftentimes, you're just like throwing spaghetti at the wall, just trying to keep up with everything. So it's really challenging, but also a very interesting take on being able to take that time for yourself and in the industry and for the business as well.
Yeah, 100%, Kelly. You hit the nail on the head. Like now, my role 5 years on, I'm throwing a lot of spaghetti at walls. I'm back. I'm back. What you were just referring to, and like campaigns coming at us, different demands from different markets, all day long. And I wish I had, because it was a real privilege to. I mean, it was a very scary, a little bit traumatic, not just for myself. It was my job, but my colleagues who'd worked for the company for 20 plus years, those who are still with us. However, it did create that space to be reflective of what had worked for the business. We're a 30-year-old business, so we're sort of legacy. There were legacy traditions and behavior in some ways, and then reflect on what had worked in the past and what needed to work for the next 30 years and the next generation of travel advisors and travel. So you're right, it was a real privilege to have that space and time to plan for that. And there was a lot of short-term stuff we had to work with at the time. But yeah, it definitely worked in our favor.
And one of the things that I remember reading as part of your bio was that you had actually met your partner while you were traveling. So not only are you in the travel industry, but your relationship was kind of hinged on you being a traveler yourself and loving, being out in the world. We'd actually just hosted a series in February sharing stories of people who met their partners while they were traveling. And yours is a little bit of a unique twist on that. Would you mind sharing your story with us?
Oh, for sure. Yes, I met my now sister-in-law when we were in Vietnam, and it was in a tiny little remote village in Vietnam, just out of Hanoi, and no one spoke English. It was a rural agricultural village, and we were on a volunteer project building a house for a family that needed it. My sister-in-law Anna, we didn't know each other at the time, and under the beating sort of Vietnamese sun on 30-degree days, and we're just shoveling dirt, listening to music, and we hit it off. We got talking, and she was the same age. I was living in Melbourne at the time. She was living on the Gold Coast, and we did hit it off. We were working for the same company, which is how we arrived at the volunteer program together. So we traveled around Vietnam together after that for about a week and had a ball. And after that trip, I would go up to the Goldie and visit her. She'd come down to Melbourne. And one time we were up in Byron Bay for a couple of nights, and I met her brother there. And then Dan and I hit it off, and we did the long distance thing for 6 months. And then I moved up to the Gold Coast where we now live, and we're married with 2 kids and a dog. So
Oh.
yeah, if it wasn't for travel in any of those contexts, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now with the family that I now have. So it was a really special, special time.
And also, like, hitting the in-law jackpot, like, how great that one of
For
your best
sure.
friends becomes your sister-in-law. That's super unique too. I love that.
Yes,
And
yeah,
so
100%.
the bulk of today's episode is to talk about Australia and New Zealand as just top destinations for honeymoon, special occasion. I mean, just travel in general, truly. But we really wanted to talk about how, especially in the U.S., and it might be a question for later, but people think of Australia and they think, oh, that's that. It's very physically, like geographically far away, right? So that's my big trip when I'm older. That's my big trip that I'm going to take, later down the track. And yes, it's far, but it's also far to get to Greece, to get to Thailand, to get to all these other places around the world. So I'm really starting to see people opening up to the idea that maybe it's not a trip that you can take only in your 50s and 60s. It's a trip that you can take for your honeymoon. I'm seeing a lot of honeymoons to New Zealand right now. So I'm really curious from your perspective as the head of marketing for ANZCRO and promoting Australia, New Zealand as unique honeymoon destinations. In your opinion, what sets these locations apart from your more traditional honeymoon hotspot for the US, like a Europe or a Caribbean?
Yeah, great question. And I apologize in advance, Kelly, because I'm so passionate about Australia being an Aussie myself and New Zealand being its a sister country to ours and one I've had the privilege of visiting many times. Your honeymoon is the start of a new beginning. It's the start of a new journey with your partner. And I have a personal mantra of start as you mean to continue. So if you want to build a life together of adventure and romance and exploration, then what better way to do it than halfway across the world in Australia or New Zealand or both, ideally? I think there's definitely that, and a honeymoon is a period of time that you look back on when you're in your 50s and 60s and you think, oh my gosh, remember when we did that? It was incredible. Let's go back. So I think just the sheer adventurous nature of making the decision to come here sets your honeymoon apart from those other destinations. I would say, and I'm not sure how many people appreciate this. I don't know how many Aussies appreciate it, that within Australia itself, it's such a country of vast landscapes and climates. So we have, the red centre with Uluru or Ayers Rock as it used to be known. And that's like desert, for thousands or hundreds of kilometres, nothing around but red desert and these incredible rock formations and a deeply spiritual place to the local Aboriginal people. So we've got that. And then we've got the tropics. We've got tropical North Queensland, which is, rains in summer, but has the Daintree, which is over 280 million years old, and the Great Barrier Reef, which you can see from outer space, apparently, don't take my word for it, which is, an incredible marine playground underneath. And then you've got the Whitsundays, which is up north as well. And you've got Western Australia and the Kimberley region. And you've got Tasmania, which is like rugged beauty and it's colder and it has a lot of history to it. And you've got South Australia with beautiful wineries and Sydney with a harbour, and like there's just so many different experiences that you can have within Australia alone. And I think with New Zealand, like that country is so spectacularly beautiful. The only way I can describe it is every time I go to New Zealand, if I'm driving from Auckland to Rotorua or from Christchurch to Queenstown, and I look out the window and I'm like, am I in a movie here? Like everything is just so picturesque, like rolling hills and aquamarine lakes and towering mountains. And so within that, that's inherently romantic because a lot of the destinations within New Zealand, especially the luxury lodges, can be quite secluded, but looking out over these beautiful vistas. So I think for those, those travelers who are getting married and want a little taste of, an adventurous life to come, then make the bold decision to head down under. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And especially because what you just mentioned in Australia, what up for me when you were speaking was no matter what time of year, you have a spectacular destination to go to. It's not like it's highly seasonal. No matter what time of year you go, there is some amazing destination in Australia that you can go, and it's the best time of year to go, no matter what time of year you decide to go. Just
100%.
depends on what part of the region you are. And New Zealand, yeah, I can definitely, and we'll talk a little bit later about the emotional connection with the nature and the land, but I am not a crier. I do not cry very easily. And I've cried looking at the mountains in New Zealand. Like my husband was like, are you crying right now? I'm like, yeah, I am actually. Like it's so unbelievably beautiful. So especially for the nature lovers and people who love to hike and be like just really being out there in the nature. There's like truly, like you said, there's nothing more romantic than that.
Mm.
Honestly, I love the way that you position that. And so you just mentioned some of the biggest destinations in Australia, like Uluru and the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree, Rotorua in New Zealand. You've had some personally, like personal experiences, deeply moving experiences in those destinations. What about the natural landscape and the environment of these two countries contribute to such emotional responses? I guess we can talk a little bit about some experiences that you might have had visiting Uluru or going to Rotorua. What was that like for you?
Yeah, great question, Kelly. I think, I'd have to speak to each of those destinations individually. When you visit Uluru, it's a sacred, the rock formation itself is a deeply spiritual place for the local Ananu people of Australia. And the Aboriginal people and the Ananu tribe is part of the Aboriginal people. They're the oldest living culture in the world. I think it's at 60,000 years, continuously living culture in the world. So as
Wow.
soon as you just visit, and the Red Centre is the region where you'll find Uluru and Kings Canyon and a couple of other places like Alice Springs. And as soon as you visit there and you're on country, which is what we would say in Australia, you just have a sense of a little bit of awe, I think, particularly when you're looking up at some of these rock formations like Uluru. Like you drive there and it's just this flat red desert, like you'd see in the movies or like you might think Australia is. And then there's this huge just rock, and you kind of get goosebumps because the rock itself has a lot of meaning. It is a sacred site, so the only people who can access all of Uluru are the local Ananu people, and the rest of us just access part of it. So it is a genuinely sacred place. And even though it is such a vast formation and that area is so, it's quite sparse, but you kind of, if you do, like I did the Wintry Wuru nighttime light shows, 1,200 drones up in the sky telling this amazing sort of dreamtime story of the
Oh,
local people. And you arrive at sunset and you've got this beautiful viewing deck, but it's just you and the other people experiencing the show looking out on Uluru. And they're like, there's no one else there. It's just you and your fellow travelers. And so it's just kind of amazing that there's this huge monolith. It's almost to the local people that is like a Sistine Chapel. Like it's deeply spiritual to them. Yeah, so you kind of I got goosebumps experiencing that and doing a sunrise tour around the base of Uluru and hearing some of the stories. They don't share all of the stories, and rightly so. But again, hearing some of the stories from the guide, it is quite moving, especially as an Australian, and I would hope a visitor too feel some significance for that. And similarly, visiting tropical North Queensland, which I've visited many times and privileged to take my family up there, walking through, the Great Barrier Reef is just spectacular in itself. It's not dissimilar to a real life version of Finding Nemo. Like it's just so bright, and the coral's bright, and the fish are bright, and you can access part of the reefs, and you snorkel off a little island, and you're literally snorkeling with turtles. Like they're just right there, and that's amazing. And then if you make the time to go to the Daintree rainforest, again, like the Daintree's been there. I have to check my notes because I still can't quite believe it, but like 180 million years old, and it's the oldest continually surviving tropical rainforest in the world. So it's older than the Amazon, and just sort of standing there amongst all these dense canopies and shrubs, and it's got its own ecosystem. Again, you kind of get goosebumps because it feels so much bigger than we are, like bigger than our lives. It's been there for these millions of years. It's around the time of the dinosaurs. And I think it is, until you stand there in the Daintree, you can't kind of appreciate its grandeur in that sense. And, you mentioned Rotorua as well. That's the cultural heartbeat, I guess, of New Zealand in many ways, certainly of the North Island. And there's a lot of Maori experiences that you can have in Rotorua that tell the story of the Maori people and their traditions and cultures, and there's a lot of activities that you can engage in. And Rotorua itself, from a cultural significance perspective, the town is set on volcanic land, and I'm no geologist, so I can't really speak to what that means, but there's a lot of bubbling geysers and natural hot springs and mud pools, and you can go to many amazing spas and have soak in mineral water, and it just is it's a very earthy place in terms of its geography, but also the people there are so down to earth and welcoming. And if you've ever met a Kiwi in New Zealand, they're just brimming with hospitality. So yeah, I mean, they're just a few examples that I could now, as I said, I'd be here all day if I was to talk about
We'll have a
all of
part
this.
two.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
I got goosebumps the whole time that you were talking because although I haven't been to Uluru and the Red Center yet, I've been to a handful of those places and it's almost like I can't help myself but almost feel the emotions again as you're talking about them. And how special would that be for someone celebrating something special, whether it's a honeymoon, a special occasion, a big birthday, to look back on that occasion and I'm getting goosebumps again, get those feelings of what it's like to be able to be in a country like Australia or New Zealand. And one thing that I always try to explain to people, it's, you kind of said before, it's kind of indescribable. It's just a very like raw nature. Like it's unfiltered. It's a lot of it is untouched. And there's a great pride taken by the indigenous cultures there to preserve. And also, although there's a lot that can be said on the American side of the way that we preserve our indigenous cultures, and not to get political on this whatsoever, but one thing that I remember when I moved to Australia was like, wow, there's a lot of acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land. And I think that also makes a very, very, at least for an American, a very unique experience because that's not something that we're faced with every day, which is something that I think Australia and New Zealand do a pretty good job at. The culture piece seems to be pretty big for the tourism, for a traveler. Like you can't really go too far without getting
Mm.
in any sort of cultural engagement, indigenous engagement, if you're intentional about traveling in the right way. What kind of cultural experiences do you think that ANZCRO executes really, really well and has a great partnership with the indigenous communities to bring it to life for travelers?
In terms of cultural experiences, I can speak to the destinations, and then the destinations that do cultural experiences really well. And then there's a number of products within that destination that do it well. And both Uluru and Kings Canyon in the Red Centre do cultural experiences really well. Those destinations are tightly managed, particularly at Uluru. I believe that all of the accommodations, so the 3 or 4 resorts there, are all managed by an Indigenous community group or a co-op. But in terms of experiences there, the Wintry Wuru nighttime experience that I mentioned is like best in show. I mean, the whole from, you get picked up on a luxury coach. It's the only way you can access it, I believe. I'm not sure if there's a private touring option because accessing the site is only limited to, I think, 2 tour companies. But anyway, so you go and it's a sunset experience and you have beautiful canapes, which are made from local ingredients, and cocktails made from local ingredients, which is nice. And then, as I said, you watch this show and it's hard to describe a nighttime light show, right? But it's like 1,200 drones in the sky that make formations about the story of the local area, because their culture of telling stories and their history is done orally through dance and storytelling rather through the written word. And Dreamtime is how they tell the stories of creation. So one of those Dreamtime stories features in that show. There's an amazing light installation also that you can experience at Uluru called the Field of Light Tour. And there's a dinner experience to that, which is incredible. Any kind of guided tour, again, a sunrise tour over Uluru is worth the early morning start. You're up in the dark on your honeymoon, but 100% it is worth it because, again, it's just peaceful and quiet and you see the sun come up over this huge sandstone monolith is amazing. And then in Rotorua on the North Island as well, that is just abundant with genuine, authentic cultural experiences from, you can visit a living Maori village there. You can do an evening cultural experience at Te Pātū where you actually engage in, like you go in and have some little canapes in a Maori looking village, and then you can engage in some games that they would have played in the tribes growing up, which is so fun. And then you have like dinner and you see a show and it's quite immersive, that experience. That's at Te Pātū. And you can go to Poia and learn about the craftsmanship of the Maori people. So the wood carving and weaving, and that facility is set within a geothermal wonderland of bubbling geysers that erupt in the background. So the whole experience is quite amazing. Yeah, and then, I can't believe I've spoken all this long about New Zealand. I haven't mentioned Hobbiton, which is not necessarily cultural to the Maori people, but certainly to the local Kiwis. Like Hobbiton, as someone who hasn't even seen Lord of the Rings, like that place is just a joy unto itself. So yeah.
That's awesome. I love how you can tell how passionate you are about it too, which I love seeing that you're able to have so much passion for what you do. I think that it just translates so much. We talked a lot about culture and we did talk a lot of those like natural landscapes and stuff that people can have really deep encounters with and be deeply changed by just seeing a sunrise over Uluru or looking at Mount Cook in New Zealand or going to the Great Barrier Reef. Like it's a lot of those experiences of, like you said, you feel how small you are and how connected you are to a bigger, a bigger community, a bigger part of us being all interconnected. If there are couples out there that are like, that's great. I love nature. I love culture, but also I love food. I love luxury. I love, shopping. Australia offers so much of that as well. So there's really like, there's something for everyone. I always like to touch on the nature and the culture piece because that's what lights my heart up. But there's also gastronomical experiences galore in either countries and luxury accommodation from, top to bottom. So for couples that are looking for more of that, like, rejuvenating or luxury experiences, maybe even like a relax and recharge, what kind of maybe destinations or experiences would you recommend to them?
Again, Kelly, there's just so many across both countries. In terms of, as soon as you said a foodie experience or something, a luxury experience, like it's just Sydney. Like Sydney is
Yeah.
one of the most beautiful cities in the world. You've lived there, hopefully you can attest to that. And every time I travel to Sydney and I fly over the harbour and you can see the harbour bridge and the opera house, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how lucky that this is in our backyard as Australians. And I think for couples that want a little bit of luxury and more sophistication on their honeymoon, start in Sydney. And there's this fantastic product that I was lucky to try a couple of years ago. It's called the Sydney Long Lunch, and you can hire it out, just the two of you, and go on a gorgeous little boat that will meet you in Circular Quay just near the Opera House. And you start there and you have a skipper and a guide, and you can start with a little champagne and have some nibbles, and then you go to a couple of restaurants that are on Sydney Harbour that are iconic even for Sydney siders. So you go to Doyle's Fish Cafe and you go on the boat over there and have an entree, and then you go around to the northern side of the harbour and have a main. So that's just one example of, I guess, not necessarily rejuvenating, but certainly something for the foodies out there, because the dining experience alone, they're iconic Sydney restaurants. And then you're on the harbour, which is just dazzling, getting a guided tour of that as well. The Blue Mountains, speaking of Sydney, that's only a short drive a short drive away by transfer, and there's some wonderful accommodation that you can do, that you can enjoy in the Blue Mountains, and take some beautiful hikes, and it's very serene, and similar, like lots of big rocky cliffs and Aussie bush. So yeah, plenty to do in Sydney. I grew up in Adelaide, so I would say for foodie type holidays, you can go out and visit the Barossa Valley. That's a very established winery growing region with lots of cellar doors with beautiful local produce and smoked meat. And then for rejuvenation, we mentioned Byron Bay earlier. Byron Bay is sort of one of the hubs of wellness in Australia that has some wonderful wellness facilities around. I keep going on about Rotorua, and it's had way too much airtime, this podcast. I haven't even touched on Queenstown, which I will get to. But there's some fantastic spas in Rotorua as well. The Wairiki Day Spa opened a couple of years ago. It's the largest spa in the southern hemisphere, just
Oh,
set on the lake.
wow.
It's just
Cool.
it's huge, but it's huge in not in a way that there's like hundreds of people there at all. It feels very intimate, but the way that you sort of rotate, if you do the restorative journey there, you sort of rotate throughout a hot zone. There's 3 different saunas, and then you do a plunge pool, and then you go into a mineral pools, and then you rotate throughout the different spa experiences. Yeah, so I mean, I could keep going, but
I actually have clients going to Wairiki in next week. They're going
Oh,
there and they're doing
fabulous.
the restorative experience. So you just made my heart
Great.
sing because they just opened, so I haven't been,
Fabulous.
but I've heard great things. So you made me feel good about that choice sending
Yeah,
them there.
great choice. It's excellent.
Amazing. Yeah, and I just think it just goes to show how much there for every type of traveler, for every age, and truly for every budget. Because in New Zealand, you can camper van and free camp in certain parts of the country, which is a whole different experience. And Australia has a pretty wide range. And for the U.S. listeners who are listening now is an excellent time to be traveling to Australia because the way that the currency exchange is, it's an excellent time for U.S. to be traveling to Australia and New Zealand. The flight is a long way to go and can be fairly expensive, but I have a lot of people that are coming to me now because now they feel like they can afford the flight and they can afford the trip, which is a great time for the US to be able to go travel there. And we touched on a lot of destinations and experiences, but there's also some like practical advice that people might not be aware of, or Australia, New Zealand might feel pretty overwhelming to them to plan. Is there any like practical advice or tips that you would give to someone who's traveling to Australia, New Zealand for the first time? Things to pack, what to look out for, anything like that?
Absolutely, Kelly. I would say first and foremost is to work with a travel advisor, because a travel advisor such as yourself, they will be able to work with you, because I said at the start, the destinations do have so much to offer. And Australia in particular is vast. It is a very big country, so it's very hard to do all of Australia, and I haven't even touched on half of it in our time together in one trip. So work with a travel advisor on what you most want to see. What type of holiday do you want to have? You mentioned camping before, and we haven't discussed that. I had a camping honeymoon down the east coast of Australia with my husband, and we love that sort of holiday, and it's just equally as beautiful as doing something more luxurious. So I guess the first step would be work with a travel advisor you trust, have an idea of, take the destinations out of it, have an idea of what you want from your honeymoon. Do you want a bit of adventure? Do you want to sit around on beautiful white sandy beaches and relax with a cocktail? Do you want to do a bit of both? Do you want to go on a road trip? Like, just sort of work out what you and your partner want to do, because in Australia and New Zealand, as you said, you can pretty much do it all. That would be my first piece of advice. Also, to your point earlier, Kelly, about the climate, you're right. At any time of year, there's something to do. In New Zealand, if you arrive during the winter season, you can go skiing in Queenstown and Wanaka, and that's just when those resort towns come to life, and they're beautiful all year round. So work out what time of year you want to travel, and then create your itinerary to suit that, because there are times of year, more so in Australia, that, for example, if you're visiting the Red Centre, don't go in the height of summer. It's just too hot and there's too many
Mm-hmm.
flies. You won't have the best time. And similarly, in some of the tropical regions, if you want to travel over Christmas, it can be cyclone season, which means rains. And again, you don't want to be stuck indoors the whole time of your honeymoon when you've come so far. So be aware of the climate, work with a travel advisor. And then from there, as long as you're aware of what sort of temperatures and what you're going to be doing on your holiday, the packing should flow pretty easily from there.
Yeah, I love that you just mentioned the flies. I just had like a visceral reaction to you talking about the flies. I remember being in Western Australia in the height of summer. We were driving from Perth up to Exmouth back down to Esperance. Like it was like 3,000 kilometers of
Gold
driving. It was
Coast,
crazy.
yeah.
But I remember being in Shark Bay and I couldn't even open my mouth because there was just the flies would just go like straight in. It was crazy. I remember being like, what the heck? This is nuts. But it's also like being aware of the different climates, different temperatures, different wildlife. People might not think that like you encounter flies in the summer, or there's different wildlife to keep an eye out for, or different times of year you might have a higher chance of seeing, let's say, penguins in Milford Sound, or whatever it is, seals in certain areas of New Zealand. Some people really want, or whales. People go whale watching in
Yeah.
Sydney or up and down the coast as well. But I really like that advice of kind of just like choosing the time of year that works best for your schedule and then working the destinations around that, because you really, really, really can't go wrong like in any of those destinations. You might think I have to see this one destination in Sydney, and maybe that's a bucket list thing for you that you have to see, but you could really like throw the dart at the map at either countries and land somewhere
Mm.
pretty amazing. So I love that you kind of gave that touch point for people to focus on. The last thing I'd love to chat about is we've talked about a lot of experiences. We've talked a lot about a lot of destinations. People might be like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that there were so many places. Now I'm even more like overwhelmed at the amazing places I can choose from. If you had to drill it down to your top 3 locations or experiences in both countries, what would that look like for you?
Okay, is this top 3 per country or 3 across both countries?
We could do whatever you want to do.
Okay, I'm gonna be greedy, and I'm gonna say top 3 per country
Let's do
by
it. I
business.
was hoping we'd do that.
Okay, great. So Australia, there's the most iconic itinerary, and it's iconic for a reason, is a classic, we call it a city rock reef itinerary. So starting in Sydney, it's the jewel of Australia's crown. You cannot go wrong with a trip to Sydney. As I said, plenty to do from Sydney out to Bondi Beach or to the Blue Mountains, Hunter Valley for wine. So start in Sydney, spend a few nights there, and then depending on the time of year, you go to Uluru because the landscape, Sydney's a big urban city set on a harbour, and then you go to the Red Centre, and it's called that for a reason. It's just red desert around. It's just quite striking. And 2 or 3 nights there, and then go to tropical North Queensland again. Like, I just implore anyone who comes to Australia to go out on the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef, I'm not sure if people realise, is very long. So it starts at Bundaberg, which probably your listeners was the Southern Great Barrier Reef, right up to Cairns. So you can actually access the Great Barrier Reef from a couple of thousands of kilometres. Don't question my geography there, but it's very long. So, a travel advisor and a destination expert like ANZCRO can recommend on where you can best access it. Many people go tropical up north, where the Daintree rainforest is as well, which I mentioned before. So that would be a classic Australian touring itinerary, especially for a first-time traveller. And within each of those destinations, you can choose luxury accommodation. You can go sort of backpacker style if you are on a budget. Depending on where you go, say in tropical North Queensland, you can do a liveaboard and stay out on the reef for a night. Like, there's some incredible ways to experience those destinations outside of a typical hotel. In New Zealand, again, you'd have to either go North and South Island or just South Island. I'm a bit torn with that. And you could arrive in Christchurch, which is a beautiful little city, and then you can 3 destinations there. That's tough. Definitely Christchurch and Queenstown, and then down to Milford Sound, Milford or Doubtful Sound. And similarly there, you can go down to Milford or Doubtful Sound. This incredible fjordland is the region, and you see these incredible fjords, and you can do an overnight boat cruise there. You can just do it for 1 night. You can do it for 6 nights, depending how much time you have. And that is just a spectacular way to experience that particular region. Queenstown is a lakeside town with these towering mountains around it. So you get these beautiful different shades coming over the lake. And again, some incredible luxury lodges in and around Queenstown, even up to, there's one lodge ex-Queenstown, the name escapes me, but the only way you can access it is via helicopter. That's how
Oh,
remote it is.
cool.
There is just, you can stay in a pure pod. There's many of those throughout New Zealand, which is a small glass walled, it's a pod really, but it's all obviously set where no one can see in. And then you just have a view out of it. So depending where you are, it might be a winery view, or it might be a lake view, or it might be a mountain view. So you can sort of have that experience in and around Queenstown, and Christchurch is a gateway to the South Island. So, and I've already spoken a lot about Rotorua and Hobbiton, and there's so much to do.
So you did bring up a good point. I get asked a lot, okay, I only have time for one island. Can you explain the differences between the South Island and the North Island? And so I would love to hear from you just like a brief description of like what does the South Island mean and what does the North Island mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in terms of the difference, the South Island has, similar to Australia, more diverse landscapes to experience. And I will declare that I have not travelled extensively on the North Island, so I could be wrong here. But no, I'm confident. On the South Island, for example, you can go right up the top of the South Island to the Nelson region, Picton Nelson, and that's a warmer climate. It's a little more temperate. You can do some beautiful walks and kayaks up the top of the South Island. And then you can head down through Kaikoura on the coast, which is famous for wildlife and whales. And that's, the Kaikoura we call where the mountains meet the sea. So that's a landscape in and of its own. And then you can go across to the west coast and see the glaciers there. You can do a heli hike on a glacier, at the same time that you've just been walking in the Abel Tasman National Park, like a few days ago. So you can experience the glaciers there, and then you can, cut across and spend some time in wine country around the central Otago region. And then, as I said, you can go right down to Tiana and experience Fiordland and the towering fjords and waterfalls. And so there's a greater, probably from a landscape and nature perspective, there's a greater breadth of experiences on the South Island. That would be the main difference, north and south.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that I like to mention, the culture is weaved across both islands, but I feel like there's the North Island is kind of like the cultural Mecca and like the indigenous Mecca. And you get more of that like volcanic, earthy feel. And then the South Island is, like you said, there are a lot of different types of landscapes, kind of the adventure hub of New Zealand as well. If I could be wrong here, but like you get the bungee jumping and the swing and the skydiving and like all the things there.
All of that.
Yes. If anyone listening heads to my website right now, transformatravel.co, my banner on my website is actually in Kaikoura. We camped and we had our camp spot right literally on the beach, and 100 meters away was the mountain ending right where the beach was starting. Like, it was one of the most stunning places to wake up in the whole world. And getting there was a bit tricky with the mountains, and like driving in a camper van down the side of a mountain is always a fun experience. That'll test your new marriage for sure, is if you can let your partner drive the camper van through New Zealand. Right? If you can survive that, you can survive anything. No, but I mean, the roads are amazing, the people are amazing, the landscape's amazing in both countries. And I'm so excited that you're able to share, obviously, so much of what you love and what you do day in and day out. So if people were listening and were like, hey, I'm now super excited to go to Australia and New Zealand, it doesn't sound as unattainable or as far away as maybe it used to sound. So we've mentioned before that ANZCRO is what we call in the travel industry a DMC, a destination marketing, destination management company. And so you work solely and primarily with travel advisors. So somebody that was listening couldn't reach out to you and be like, hey, can you plan my trip for me? So the best way that a traveler listening could make sure that their honeymoon was organized with your specific team of specialists is that they reach out to a travel advisor that also works with ANZCRO. Is that correct?
100%. And we work with all our travel advisors. So all you would need to do, all one of your listeners would need to do, Kelly, is just request that their travel advisor works with ANZCRO on their holiday itinerary. As you said at the start, I work in marketing, so I have a good understanding of the destination and product, but our reservations team, so that the people that would actually help plot the itinerary and work with the travel advisor to fulfill the brief from the client, they have outstanding product and destination knowledge. We are specialists. We sell Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific, which we haven't touched on today. And so our reservations team in particular know those destinations inside out. We have product updates and training at least twice a week. So we're constantly learning about new product, constantly learning about what's happening in the regions. And we can advise on all of those points that you mentioned about winding roads. We know the roads of New Zealand like the back of our hand. We know the climates in Australia and the best times to visit. All of those little bits that can, to some extent, make or break a holiday. That's what our staff are the most knowledgeable. So all they need to do is ask for their travel advisor to work with ANZCRO.
Yeah, and a really good piece what you mentioned there about the little pieces that can make or break a holiday is also, if your travel advisor is based in the US, they're going to be on US time. And while they're there during their waking hours, making sure that you're okay, there's actually a large part of your day in Australia, New Zealand is when your advisor's asleep. So what I really love working with ANZCRO is because my travelers, my guests, my clients have 24/7 concierge support should a tire pop while they're driving in New Zealand, or should they have questions about which restaurant should they stop at from their place from Rotorua to Auckland, so it's like that touch point also makes or breaks that holiday too, like knowing that you have that support behind you. Should you just need a question answered, or should something happen and you need some broader support? So I that's what gives me peace of mind as an advisor, as well as knowing that my clients are in good hands when they're on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So we wrap up these episodes with 3 rapid fire questions. I didn't share them ahead of time. So yeah, I know. I just saw your face. They're easy. They're easy. Okay. So we wrap these up with every single guest. Number 1 is, what country or place has left the biggest impact on you? And I'm going to say here, you can't say Australia and New Zealand.
I was going to say, yeah, that would be hard. Gosh, I don't know, because I feel like every time you travel, it leaves a place on your heart. I loved New York City. I love New York City. I just found it was so vibrant, eclectic, fast paced, but there's an authenticity there that just shines through with the people and the places. So I'm going to go with that.
You are the first guest to say New York City, so that's super unique. I love that. So number 2 is, what is your must-have travel item? Like if you had an accessory or some sort of product that you always have to have with you when you're traveling.
This is so daggy and so impractical, but it's a book. It's an actual book, and it's not a Kindle, because I used Kindles for a while and I kept on leaving them behind in the pockets and planes. I think I went through about 3 of them, and I reverted to a book. It's not a book and like a Yeti water bottle.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last question is, what's the biggest life lesson that you've learned while traveling?
I think it's to our point before, is that 2 things. I'm going to cheat. One is that it's our time on earth when you learn about the history of the places that you're traveling, even when you're in a country like Australia that's relatively young, if you take the Indigenous culture out of it, is that our time on earth is so short. It is but a speck of dust in the timeline of the world. And I think the more you travel, the more you learn about people and places and what's gone before them in the country or wherever you are, you realize that all of the problems that you might have at home, or the issues that you think are issues, you're outside of your comfort zone. You might be in a country that doesn't speak English, and you just realize how significant you are, but in a really liberating way, in that. Yeah, I said I was going to say 2 things, but I think I said that in one. So I think that's what I love about travel, what leaves an impression. Was that the question? I've gone off
Yeah. Oh my
tangent.
gosh. No, that was
Yeah.
that was beautiful. I think that's, yeah, hit the nail on the head of how kind of going back to what you said before, how small you are in such a big, broader sense. And I love that. Thank you. That's a great way to end it.
Okay,
That was
okay,
beautiful.
nice.
So if people love this episode, they want to say hi to you, what's the best place for them to connect with you?
If they want to connect with me personally, they're more than welcome to look me up on LinkedIn under Amy Mace. If they want to connect with ANZCRO's product and understand how they can best plan a holiday or an itinerary, we actually have just released our Honeymoons Down Under brochure, which your listeners can
Oh,
find at anzcro.com. And there we've got little snippets, sort of 3 or 4 night itineraries across Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific that just might help a couple thread them together to create an ultimate honeymoon, because we're all short on time, and it just helps, I guess, sort of chunk down these big vast countries and say, okay, so this is how you could do 3 nights Sydney, or 3 nights South Australia, or 3 nights in the Marlborough in New Zealand, for example. So yeah, check out our Honeymoon Down Under brochure at anzcro.com.
amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us today, for sharing your vast knowledge of Australia and New Zealand. And I'm so looking forward to many, many of our listeners traveling with ANZCRO soon.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transform with Travel podcast. If you have a friend or a loved one you were thinking of during this episode, spread a little love and share this episode with them, someone who could use a little inspiration. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well. To learn more about us, head to www.transformwithtravel.co, and I'll see you on the next episode. This is your reminder to keep on exploring.